the marimba? Is it so easily portable? It's not like a piccolo or something difficult. A special thank you to Linda Kennard, Carole's sister, for the beautiful flowers, and for Women's Fellowship for the fellowship lunch and the reception following, so make sure that you make your way down for that. I'd like to welcome you to the celebration of life for Carole Hugunin. May God give you, for every storm, a rainbow, for every tear, a smile, for every care, a promise, and a blessing in each trial, for every problem life sends, a faithful friend to share, for every sigh, a sweet song, and for every answer, and an answer for each prayer. In the midst of life, we are in death. From whom can we seek help? Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Friends, we have gathered here to celebrate our faith and to bear witness to the life and love of Carole Hugunin amongst us. We come together in grief, acknowledging our human loss. May God grant us grace that in pain we may find comfort, and sorrow, hope, in death, resurrection. Let us pray. O God, as we stand before the mystery of death, may we see the light of your love illuminating our paths. Help us commit ourselves and those dear to us to your never-failing love, both in this life and in the life to come, so that when our days here are accomplished, we may enter the joy of your home, not made with hands, but eternal in the heavens. Amen. And now I was reading from Ecclesiastes.
From Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 through 12. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will withstand. A threefold cord is not quickly broken.
Our eulogy and family remembrance was put together by John. And John, it is an honor that we read Ecclesiastes because for Carole and you were always two. And two are better than one. And you had great reward for your toil. Carole Hugunin was born in Chicago in 1944, training for the Tour de France. Around the same time, John was growing up in Bakersfield. John training for the Tour de Frankenbeans. That actually, that did not come from John. I took liberty on those last two slides. Apologies, John. Carole's family moved to Santa Monica 2 years later, and she became a beach bunny and continued to live with a wonderful younger brother, Ralph, and younger sister, Linda. Oh, we're going the wrong way. Carole graduated from Samo High School in 1962, and she was accepted to UC Berkeley. She was accepted, but her conservative father refused to let her go there because of all the left-wing radicals. Those are his words, not John's. This was during the Berkeley free speech movement led by Mario Savio, and so instead Carole decided to go to the UC Santa Barbara, and John writes, "Thank God for her conservative father." Carole met John at a sorority fraternity party, and John was immediately smitten by the beautiful beach blonde bunny from Santa Monica, though they spent their first meeting discussing differential calculus and integral calculus. That's what they say. I'm not sure I believe it. But the two nerds really hit it off, and Carole and John both graduated from UC Santa Barbara in 1966. Shortly after graduation, Carole and John were married on September 17, 1966. They spent 59 wonderful years together, including the 4 years they were together in college. Their first home was in Goleta, just north of Santa Barbara. Carole taught at the local elementary school, and John worked for IBM. Their son Jim was born in 1970. Carole is survived by son Jim, daughter-in-law Aletta, grandson Jasper, granddaughter Mithril. She is also survived by her brother Ralph, sister Linda, and sister-in-law Maureen, and her sister-in-law Norma, and by nieces Pam and Leah. And now we are going to, if you will rise for the singing of our opening hymn, "In the Bulb There is a Flower." Lee. Please be seated. As we move to the specific aspects of Carole's life, those of you acquainted with John's presentations know that he likes to base his talks on letters in a name. So this morning we will use Carole's name as a guide to share more of her life. Help me with the letters. What's the first one? C. That's right. Carole and John began coming to NBCC in 1982. Almost 40 years later, John will tell you that Carole's desire to attend this church was the best counsel Carole ever gave him. Carole was an active member. She served communion as a member of the deaconate board, and she also served on the music, theater, and youth boards. Carole and John were members of the Mariners, young married group. That was when the rule said the combined age of the married couple should be no greater than 80. The new rule is the married couple shall no longer be more than 180 years old, I think that's the new rule. I'm not quite sure. Carole and John served in many roles on the Mariner cabinet and were named Mariner skippers in 1989. Carole felt honored to lead the Mariners the year they celebrated their 50-year anniversary. See if you can see Graham and Bunny Lewis in the group. The two of them always enjoyed working in the Mariner food booth at the hometown fair. They always enjoyed Mariner campouts. On their first outing, they used the back of their Volvo station wagon to sleep in, and then graduated to Carter's tent and then a trailer home. Notice where Carole's two fingers are. She's giving him kind of bunny ears in the back, if you see that. She always enjoyed clowning around with John. She was very active in women's fellowship. And I'd like to invite Pat Martson up to say a little bit more about Carole's involvement in women's fellowship.
Well, most of you knew Carole much longer than I did, and so I feel very honored that John asked me to say a few words. I met John and Carole sometime around 2011 after church at a coffee hour. I went up and introduced myself thinking I was meeting somebody new. Little did I know that they'd been here a lot longer than I had. I first joined the church in 2011 and started going to some of the women's fellowship luncheons. Whenever Carole had a hand in the meal, I soon came to realize that she was known as a fabulous cook. She probably had a hand in preparing hundreds and hundreds of meals, maybe close to 1,000, during her tenure. Then in 2014, Carole and I became co-presidents of Women's Fellowship. We worked together for 2 terms, and I thoroughly enjoyed working with her. We would always meet at her house for our planning, and she would always have delicious munchies to start the meeting to go with the coffee. And then I would learn about her owl collection and many of the stories of how she'd come to get some of her owls. Carole made being a co-president very easy. You know, sometimes when you're co-presidents, it can get a little tense, but she was always compassionate, and if we disagreed, it wasn't a problem, and she was always positive and upbeat, especially even when I came up with crazy ideas like calling the people who weren't in circles squares. Carole took time to reach out to others with her gracious hospitality, her compassionate spirit, and her positive outlook on life. We have all felt and continue to feel the loss of this very hardworking member of our congregation.
I'd like to invite Carole's granddaughter, Mithril, up to say a bit more about Carole's needle crafting.
Hello, I'm Mithril Carole Hugunin. I'm Carole's granddaughter, and I grew up impressed with what Grandma could create with her cooking, with needlecraft, and especially with her knitting. She taught me to knit at a pretty young age, and I remember it being a great calming way to spend some free time that would make something that could be used, that could be shared with others. One special memory is when she came to visit, and that was a lot of work. She really made an effort to be part of our lives growing up, even though I was out in Washington State and she was still living here in California. And she was crafting these durable tote bags out of recycled plastic bags. It was a wild, creative project, and my brother and I were invited to join in. We were too young to be good knitters. We could not help her with the actual knitting of the bags. But what she had us do is she had us weave the recycled plastic thread that she was using to make these bags out of. And to me, it was a great memory of how she could bring us together. She could include us in this creative process. And I'm so glad Carole was able to be a part of our lives, and I'll always love her and hold on to her memory. Thank you.
Carole's also very active in the women's quilters group. They made the amazing centennial quilt hanging behind them. And now I'd like to invite Carole's grandson, Jasper, up to say a bit more about Carole's quilting.
Thank you. I'm Jasper, Carole's grandson. My grandma Carole has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. As Mithril said, she and Grandpa made a big effort to be a part of our lives. We would see them several times a year, sometimes going over to their place, sometimes they would come up to see us. Some of the earliest memories I have with my grandma are often when we would be visiting with them, my parents would go out for a date night, and my grandparents would watch us kids. And those were always very fun times. We would play games, and we would stay up past our bedtime. Grandpa would tell grandpa jokes. And my grandma would play with us as well. As I grew up, I have memories of doing crafting with my grandma and playing games. I learned to play bridge to be able to play with her and grandpa, play gin rummy or Yahtzee, games that she loved to play. The story I want to tell today is about this quilt that is currently hanging up in the fireside room in the museum. One year, my grandma offered to make me a quilt based on a design that I could come up with. And this was very cool, but the problem was I had no idea what makes a reasonable quilt design. So the design I came up with had all sorts of sharp corners and weirdly shaped triangles and weird angles. And it was very difficult for my grandma to put this quilt together. It took her several tries. She had to tear it apart and start over a couple of times. I think that in the process, she had to invent one or two new quilting techniques to get it all to come together. And it ended up as this beautiful quilt that keeps me warm in the winter and is a tangible piece of memory that I have of my grandma. So please check it out in the fireside room after the service, if you have the time. Thank you.
And thank you to Jasper and Mithril. And the two of them have arranged a display of Carole's knitting and quilting downstairs in Carole's museum. Don't leave without walking through the museum. I'm going to invite the choir up to honor the beauty of Carole's painstaking work. They're going to sing For the Beauty of the Earth. And while they are singing For the Beauty of the Earth, I invite you to think about memories that you have of Carole, because you will have an opportunity for audience participation time following an open mic.
Fantastic.
The next C is for cooking. Carole truly fed the masses. She was a major player on the Women's Fellowship cooking team. Thousands of meals were prepared by the team for MBCC annual dinners and Women's Fellowship meetings. Carole also helped Deanne Johnson with food preparations for the youth summer schools and also prepared food for many patrons' recognition lunches held for various MBCC plays. Outside of church, Carole volunteered for Project Needs, helping to prepare meals for the needy at St. Paul's Church in Redondo Beach. If you added up all of the meals she served to others, she'd give Jesus a run for his money, and that is saying something. Oops. All right. A fantastic cook, Carole taught John how to cook, and they would switch between the roles of chef and sous chef. Ever the artist, Carole would take a pinch of this and a pour of that to create something scrumptious. As an engineer, John would add exactly 1/3 teaspoon of this to 1/4 cup of that to make the same recipe. It seems that they worked out well both ways, or so John tells me. Whenever John and Carole traveled, they always tried to fit in a cooking class, and they've taken cooking classes in Hungary, France, Italy, Spain, and other countries. They've taken classes from Sally Schmidt, the founder of the French Laundry, made famous by Thomas Keller. They've taken cooking classes in Nova Scotia, as well as Hungary. Not forsaking their homeland, Carole and John took classes from Alice Waters, Jose Andres, and the chefs at the Culinary Institute of America and shared what they learned with their friends and Americans. The Culinary Institute of America, if he'd have said CIA, Larry Humphrey would have thought they were talking about the Central Intelligence Agency, so we're not going there. Another C in Carole is for community. Carole served on the Hometown Fair Board for many years. She was an active member of the Beach Cities American Association of University Women. Carole also worked every year as a volunteer at various election polling locations, while both Carole and John even shared their home in the old days for a voter polling place. The final C in Carole, I promise, the final C is for competition. Carole loved to play games. John and Carole played competitive bridge as a team. They even played on bridge club cruises. Very few married couples played as a team because they would get in arguments over each other's mistakes. At least they started the cruise married, but then they often, no, I'm kidding. Carole and John never had one argument over the years they played together. Carole enjoyed playing golf with her family. When she wasn't playing bridge or golf, she enjoyed board games and working on puzzles with Jim, Aletta, Jasper, and Mithril when they visited. Carole and John competed in the Calaveras County Frog Jumping Competition. Not sure this is a sign of respect for the minister, but their frog's name was Calhoun. She also was a regular member of the TGIF group here at church. She loved playing games and socializing on Fridays. John would like to show you a very special video of the TGIF ladies singing happy birthday to Carole on her 77th birthday. Hopefully.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Carole. Happy birthday to you. Yay!
Yeah, I And for the record, they all paid me to not sing.
What's the next letter in Carole's name? A. Stands for acting support. Although Carole and John never took a drama class in their lives, thanks to Sally Stowe, they became involved in the theater here at NBCC. Carole started off painting sets with Sally and then moved to stage managing. She also raised money for the plays by organizing ticket sales and patron donations. Then, in recognition of the patrons, Carole would organize a patron's lunch and with a team prepare the food for the lunch. Together, she was involved with over 20 plays. Carole and John also worked together during a play. Sometimes they had different roles, Carole stage managing and John attempting to act and even sometimes singing. Then, with Carole's encouragement, John and Carole moved up the production plays. They produced 3 plays, Godspell, 10 Little Indians, and 12 Angry Men. The first of and only theater in the round done at NBCC. Carole was a team player and got along with everyone on the set. Carole, John, Jim, Aletta, Jasper, and Mithril are regular patrons and attendees at the Ashland, Oregon Shakespearean Festival. They started going when Jim and Aletta were in high school. They even stayed at Graham and Bunny Lewis's bed and breakfast a few years. What's the next letter? R. Carole loved to read books and share what she had learned through reading. She even got John interested in reading, and the two of them enjoyed sharing books on their Kindles. Carole was a member of AAUA. UW, excuse me. John would join her at their special meetings where a book author would be present to discuss their writing. Carole loved reading with the kids. You couldn't get her away from books even when they were traveling. Carole and John were members of multiple book clubs. When both Carole and John read Boys in the Boat, they took a short trip to the UCLA rowing boathouse just for kicks. Another R is for resilience. I'm at a loss regarding this in the next slide. All right, what is the next letter? O. Carole's sorority mascot was an owl, so she decided to collect owls. At last count, there are over 300 pictures, sculptures, and stuffed owls in the house, and that is not even counting her socks. The 2 grandkids enjoyed sharing Carole's love of owls. They enjoyed reading about them. And there's nothing like owl puke. I mean, nothing says grandmotherly love like owl pellets, I think is what they call them. But most of all, they enjoyed making owl cookies. Yum. I almost forgot there's a bathroom in her house that has over 70 owls in it. Of course, it is referred to as the hoot room. You know, we have a counseling center here affiliated with the church, John, if that ever becomes something that you need to avail yourself of. Even Carole's friends got into the owl bandwagon when an occasional gift was warranted. Quoting John, life was a hoot being with Carole for 59 years. What's the next letter? L. Loving wife, mother and grandmother, sister and daughter-in-law. Pam Conde and our MCC resident flautist played The Gift of Love at church a few months back with Lee Lassiter on the piano. It was perfect for Carole's memorial. Since Pam is on a trip to Croatia, she gave us permission to play the video of her performance at church. What's the final letter of Carole's name? E, that's right. Carole was an explorer. She and John loved to travel together. The key to success was that they had common interests and an urge to explore. They traveled throughout the world, Asia, North America, Middle East, and the continent of Europe. During their travels in Europe, they preferred to purchase guide books on each country and then drive themselves around in a rental car. No need for an official human guide. Their most adventurous trip they ever took was to rent a small canal boat and navigate it through the canals and locks of southern France. And they wonder why the French hate us. Neither one of them had ever driven a boat in their life. It was a learning experience, one to never be forgotten. It was all John's crazy idea. Having a resilient wife like Carole made the trip a success. He is also for exchange students. When Jeff left home for college, Carole needed to fill Jim's void. The solution was to house 9 different exchange students over many summers. The 3 Chinese students loved Carole's white rice. They claimed she made it as good as they had at home. Actions speak louder than words. One of the male students ate an entire pot of rice every single day. A French student stayed with Carole and John for 4 summers in a row. At her invitation, Carole and John attended her wedding in Menton, France. One of the 2 Japanese students was riding his bike across America. The 2 Swedish girls enjoyed going to the beach and checking out the lifeguards. I'm quite sure the lifeguards enjoyed checking them out as well. The most interesting student was Jeon Kim from South Korea. As a freshman at Miracosta High School, Jeon was living with her aunt and uncle, but they were not getting along, hard to believe. Someone asked Carole if Jeon could stay with them for a few weeks until everything cooled down. A few weeks turned into 4 years. And thanks to Carole's home teaching, Jeon Kim graduated with honors, even though she could barely speak English as a freshman. Jeon's story illustrates Carole's skill as an educator. Carole received her teaching credentials in 1967. As part of the process, she worked as a student teacher in Watts. She always said that was the best teaching experience she ever had. It gave her an appreciation for the many parents who she met who valued the importance of a good education for their children. Carole's first official teaching job was at an elementary school in Goleta. She taught there 3 years until Jim was born in 1970. She focused on raising Jim until they moved to Manhattan Beach in 1982. She restarted her teaching career at Meadows School. There, with Jim's help, Carole set up the first computer lab in MB United School District. Carole was also active in education as a parent with her membership in 3 PTAs and president the Kiva School PTA in Arizona. At this point, I'd like to invite Jim up to say a few words about his mom.
Oh. Didn't quite realize how hard it might be to go after all of this. I wanted to start off by mentioning that last picture of my mom teaching all those kids how to program actually has a funny story. We didn't set up the lab together. When I was in 8th grade, I actually wound up setting up the lab because this was at a time when none of the teachers knew what these computer things were or what to do with them. And so they brought in an 8th grader instead. For a long time, I've kind of liked to brag about the story that, yeah, that was it. And then, I gave my mom her job after that because, she filled in for me. What I don't usually include is she did the job way better than I ever did, partially because of that first experience, actually teaching kids. And I know more about computers than she does, but her ability to teach people and to share knowledge is so much greater than mine is. The other thing that I don't usually share, I was brought up here because I was the one person who wasn't going to cry, wasn't I? Yeah. The only reason I could do the job in the first place was my mom had taught me so much through the years, and it was her learning and all those things that I'd learned that made me able to do it. I want to tell a happy story about something that I learned from my mom. You've seen the pictures about the trips we'd take to Ashland, Oregon. We'd take those trips with my wife, Alita. One more time, Alita Fenella, not to make fun of the minister, but you have way too many names to keep track of. And, it was an amazing celebration of theater. It was also a chance to play doubles tennis with my parents and to play contract bridge against them. Playing bridge against my parents got harder every year as they got better at bridge and got really good. And, of course, eating at a lot of lovely restaurants. And one of our favorite restaurants had this dish of spinach cheese wontons. So every time we'd go to Ashland, we'd order spinach cheese wontons, and we'd eat them together as a family. And then we'd leave, and it would be another year before we could have spinach cheese wontons again. So my mom comes up with a wonderful idea that we should figure out the recipe to spinach cheese wontons. And this sounds crazy to me, but this is the way my mom had this intuitive feel in the kitchen that my dad didn't have, and I never even managed to learn from her. But she was able to take a pinch of this cheese and a pinch of that cheese and try a little bit of this, and we'd wrap it all up in a wonton wrapper, cook it up, because the flavors change as you cook it up, and it heats, and you have the fried wonton, and we'd try one, and it wasn't very good. Try a different recipe, it was a little better. We kept doing this until, my mom, Alita, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, figured out a great recipe. And we had a really good recipe for wontons. One thing we learned from that, though, was that making just a few wontons for ourselves was too many to eat. And, this was another lesson I learned about food from my mom, so wontons became a recipe we made for parties, and it was something to share, and it was for sharing with other people. The other part of this is, I think sharing these kinds of experiences with my girlfriend is part of why she is my wife now. And, when my wife gets together with her friends, listens to them complain about their mother-in-laws, my wife really likes to chime in with her own stories to show people how wonderful a mother-in-law can be. To finish the story, the next year we came back to Ashland, and we went to our restaurant, and we wanted to see, did our wontons measure up to this restaurant? And we go in, we taste the wontons, and everybody agrees we didn't get the recipe right. Our wontons don't taste quite like the restaurant. So what do? Well, turns out our wontons were way better than the restaurant's. So in the end, we were pretty happy. I'd love to tell you more stories about my mom, about her making, this bright pink jelly out of prickly pear cactus, which seemed completely insane to me, because somehow we didn't get all of the needles from the prickly pears into our tongues. How she shared her joy of reading to me. She introduced me to the great masters of science fiction like Heinlein and Asimov and Bradbury. I remember reading science fantasy trilogies together where the new book would come out in hardcover and the two of us would race to the bookstore so we could buy the book the day it was available, and then we got to argue about who got to read it first. All the amazing things she made, you can see so many of them in the museum, but she also branched out and tried things like stained glass, or we made puppets together. Or one year I told her I wanted to be a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater for Halloween. And rather than say, "You're crazy," she said, "Okay," and that's what I was for Halloween. I even feel like, after all of these great stories about her cooking, I wanted to tell you a story about, you never put my mom in charge of cooking rolls, because it turns out that rolls and toast are the one thing she often messes up. And rolls and toast come out burnt more often than not. And how that can possibly be true with all of the amazing things she can cook the rest of the time, I will never know. This is when I should end my story, but I have a second story that I have to tell today. But I want to wrap this up quickly by sharing what was, in my mind, the greatest gift my mom gave me. Oh, and this is going to be tough, but my mom gave the world's best hugs. we're going to see if I can tell another story. This one's slightly less personal, and I know I've used up more time than I told the minister I was going to take. But I have to give this a try because the opening about Ecclesiastes and the romance of my parents is one that, even as a son, I want to try to tell. You've already heard about them playing doubles tennis, partner bridge together, how even playing partner bridge at high levels couldn't tear them apart. The story that clearly the son should be responsible for telling is that if you ever showed my parents a room with 2 beds in it, they'd figure out a way to share one of them. And it doesn't matter how small or narrow that single bed might be. I'm pretty sure that if you showed them a room with 2 cots in it, they would figure out a way to make one of the 2 cots work. They also both had a lot of weaknesses where the other was strong. My mom's memory was amazing. You could talk to her about things from 20 years ago and she could clearly remember what happened. Talking about history with her was amazing. Playing Trivial Pursuit with her was a big mistake. My dad also has really good memory, I'm sure you know, really good memory for bad jokes. It seems that the worse the joke, the better his memory is. On the other hand, to give him credit where credit is due, his organizational skills are fairly strong. My mom's ability to get really hard things done, despite poor organizational skills, was amazing. And I'm sorry and happy to say she shared both of those talents with me. My mom's hearing was amazing. She could pick out conversations across the room. When we were in a restaurant, she'd often tell us about this fascinating thing those people at that table 5 over were talking about. And on the other hand, her vision was not so great. I don't know how many of you know, not so great as in like there's been at least one medical journal article written about her eyes, level of not so great. But together, my parents had great memory and organization coupled with crystal clear vision and hearing. Her vision was a problem for many years. I don't know how many of you knew. My dad was an amazing help with trying to deal with that, with getting her to doctors to do whatever they could, amazing new technology of 3D printed contact lenses. And he used his great organizational skills to learn to be a nurse with eye drops. And there were these many, many different kinds of eye drops, and you had to give different ones at different times of the day. And he figured this out and managed to get my mom the right eye drops all the time and managed to make her, well, at least somewhat cheerful about it. And that, I think, was great. And then as my mom's health got worse, she spent time in hospitals, and when she was in the hospital, my dad was always there. And when her health got really bad, he turned this into live-in nursing care that he gave her when she needed it. And I know he had a lot of help with this. But for huge parts of every single day, my dad was the care for my mom. And I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and thank my father for this. I think this was a priceless gift that he gave to my mom. And I know that it made her as happy and comfortable as she could have been in her final months. I can't quite finish there, because there are also so many gifts my mom gave to my dad through their relationship. And it's such a joy to me to still see as I miss my mom, to see those in my dad today. When I was a kid, my dad knew how to barbecue. That was it. You could take meat, put it on a grill, cook it for the right amount of time, came out pretty darn good. You've seen all the cooking classes he went to with my mom, and now I think, most people might call him a good cook. I'm still gonna call him a decent cook, because I was raised to a higher standard in my family. When I was a kid, my dad didn't read except for work. And I couldn't believe this. My mom and I were such incredible readers, and we just loved books, but he would not read anything that he didn't have to for his job. And now, I actually just found out he's now the head of 2 book clubs, which I hope he can turn back into 1 sometime fairly soon, because that's probably the right number. But he's discovered the joy of reading and has become a reader who I can now share books and share that part of joy and see that part that I loved of my mom in him now. And finally, which you've already heard, but when I was a kid, my dad was very reluctant to go to church. We won't talk about me going to church, it's a whole other story. But my dad's reluctance changed under my mom's influence. And I'm so happy that the two of them found Manhattan Beach Community Church together almost 40 years ago. They've given a lot to this community, but what they've received in return has been priceless. And thank you all. I think my mom and my dad made a great team. They made each other better people, but most importantly, they made each other happy. And now I'm going to borrow another line from the main talk and wrap this up by bringing you to a video of my parents on a paddle wheeler cruise up the Mississippi River in 2017.
I think when she was whispering in your ear, wasn't she saying it's a pinch of basil, not a quarter teaspoon? Isn't? I could be wrong there. In grief and sorrow, there is joy of memory and love. In the words of our faith, God gathers up the fragments of our lives that nothing may be lost. And now, if you'll please rise for our last hymn, When Love is Found. And now we are to, please be seated. We are at audience participation time. So if you have memories that you would like to share, this is the opportunity to do that. This thing is making a mess of the mic.
I treasure the moments Carole and I spent in the kitchen. We tried our hand at catering because we were encouraged to do so. The first time we catered together was a fundraiser. Everyone within the congregation was urged to do something and then give the money to church. And that worked out pretty well. We did a couple of gigs, and people enjoyed our cuisine. Well, most people had already tasted it, so they knew what to expect. But at any rate, as time went on, it was clear we were not business-like enough to do this successfully. We got kind of taken at one wedding reception in which the bride was told all of her family not to eat until everything was gone because she'd only made we were told there'd be so many people, and we'd made way more than we needed anyway. So everybody ate, but we didn't get paid accordingly. Anyway, that's a negative. Didn't mean to be negative here. It's just clear business wasn't our preference.
When I came to this church 21 years ago, Carole was one of the most welcoming women to me in all the congregation, and I'll never forget that. And her participation in our last Wednesday book group was always enjoyable. We will miss her.
This is J.C. Edwards. I've got to hand it to Carole. Carole was a blonde beach girl from Santa Monica, which is about as cool as you can get in Southern California. And what she saw in a sweaty redhead from Bakersfield, I'll never know.
That is a question many of us have asked.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Selway. I go to Journey of Faith, and Carole welcomed me in the book club. And nobody asked me to the spring lunch because they didn't know who I was, but she had me sit at her table.
Thank you.
So I'm wearing my owls today for Carole. I just have a little story about how I learned Carole was my sorority sister. We were in Mariners together, and they were having a party at their house, and I needed to use the bathroom. So I walked into this bathroom, and really, literally 70 or more owls were staring at me. And I thought, nobody would have this many owls if they weren't a Chi Omega. And so I learned that we were sisters. And now she's gone to the Omega chapter. And I hope she rests in peace.
Hi, I'm Linda, Carole's sister, younger sister, by 17 months. But I wanted to say how Carole, from the very beginning, wanted to be a teacher. All of the teachers knew it that we had. And when I was a year behind her, so one of the years, I had to turn in a book report that she had gotten an A on the year before. And I thought, Well, that she said it so well, I think I need to turn this same book report in. I did, and I did not get an A, I got a C. So she was loved by the teachers as well as everybody else. I miss her dearly. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that Carole did not assist me doing the Vacation Bible School. She taught me, she did it for years. She's the one who taught me to have the protein, the whatever, and the dessert, the sweet, and she had graphs of all of this. And then when I met Linda and did her hair at Long Beach when she was ill, and that's when Carole stepped back and asked me to come in, and she was quite shocked I could cook. She said, of all the people I know, I would have never thought to ask you. I said, I have 6 children. What do you think happened? So I love her dearly. We had a wonderful time, and she did come back and assist me after and wouldn't take it back.
John, I'd just like to say, in spite of all your shortcomings, you definitely married one of the best, and Carole would be very proud of you and your family, your wonderful family, for a terrific, terrific service. I'm sure she's smiling right now.
Hi, I'm Rita Cook, and years and years and years ago, perhaps it was Carole's idea, I don't really know, but they invited my husband Ron and I to go up to the Hollywood area. And I've thought about this so many times. There we were with the windows down, the radio blasting, and we were bumper to bumper on Hollywood Boulevard, just having the time of our lives. And John was encouraging us. Carole was really quiet, but she was okay with it all. But I'll just never forget that. I think we were new mariners, and they were trying to help us get in the swing of things or something.
Nothing says welcome to Mariners like bumper to bumper traffic.
John, I'm glad we came today. I realized from the presentation that we have a couple things in common besides being in the book club and riding bikes together. But you had a hard time coming to church. And thank you to you and Carole for getting us on the cabinet and getting us involved in church.
I'd also like to thank the members of our Manhattan Beach Rotary Club for being here. It's a very philanthropic organization locally and internationally, and it's another part of my family as well as this church. So thank you, Rotarians.
Let us pray. O God, all that you have given us is yours. As first you gave Carole to us, now we give Carole back to you. For all that Carole has given us, which makes us what we are, for that of her which lives and grows in each of us, and for her life that in your love will never end, we give you thanks. Receive Carole into the arms of your mercy, receive us also, and raise us into newness of life, Draw those of us who remain in this life closer to one another. Make us faithful to serve one another. And give us to know that peace and joy, which is eternal life. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. And before we do the benediction, I think I walked over Lee's. Chances are wonderful, wonderful. I began the service with an Irish blessing, and I will end the service with one. John is wearing a sweater today, made from Irish wool, designed and knitted by Carole. He calls it his priceless sweater. Carole and John both had some Irish relatives, which may be news to some of you regarding Carole, not John. Of course, we all know John is part Irish, and there is enough blarney in him for 3 Irishmen. And so with that, where is the blessing? Oh, come on. There we go. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields, and until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand And as the lads often add, may you be 3 days in heaven before the devil knows you're dead.